alone, no chaperone can get our number. The world's in slumber, let's misbehave. There's something wild about you, child, that's so contagious. Let's be outrageous, let's misbehave.
Good afternoon, everyone. Nothing Sacred was released in 1937, but many of its themes are just as relevant today. The film is a blistering satire about a small-town girl named Hazel Flagg who gets to live out her big city fantasies, all on the basis of a lie. But it's also about so much more, namely influencer culture and the public's ability to be taken in by a cult of personality. And it's also about the news media's role in turning these figures into false idols. Now, the film came to be because in early 1937, producer David O. Selznick announced that screenwriter Ben Hecht would be adapting James H. Street's short story, A Letter to the Editor, for the big screen. Hecht's working knowledge of the newspaper industry, illustrated in his and Charles MacArthur's acerbic play, The Front Page, made him the perfect fit. He completed his first draft within 2 weeks, but David O. Selznick wasn't entirely satisfied. He thought that the script was a bit too dark and feared that it would never pass the censor's smell test. Hecht was resistant, but ultimately agreed to make some changes. Now, in the meantime, Selznick signed his A Star is Born director, William Wellman, to helm this project. Wellman and Selznick didn't necessarily see eye to eye on the set, due to primarily what Wellman described as Selznick's, and I quote, egocentric ball-busting style, end quote. Still, the two men remained friendly away from the set, and Wellman even contributed direction, albeit uncredited, to some of Selznick's projects, including The Adventure of Tom Sawyer and Duel in the Sun. Now, in the meantime, relations between Hecht and Selznick deteriorated after the latter refused to cast Hecht's longtime friend, John Barrymore, in the leading role of newspaper reporter Wally Cook. In Hecht's memoirs, he wrote that Barrymore's alcoholism had interfered with his ability to secure work, and that he was relying on cue cards by that point to deliver his lines. Hecht knew that Selznick had a fondness for Barrymore and recalled, and I quote, his was the only picture that John had hanging in his waiting room, end quote. Selznick was sympathetic and told Hecht that if Barrymore could memorize one half-page monologue, then the role was his. When Barrymore failed to deliver, Selznick regretfully told Hecht that he couldn't take on such a liability, but perhaps in some way he already knew that the actor was not up to the task. Instead, Selznick cast Fredric March, with whom he had also just worked on A Star is Born. I think he made the right choice. March's sardonic tone perfectly captures Wally's inherent cynicism. But his casting allegedly caused a rift between Selznick and Hecht, leading the latter to walk off the picture in late May. Selznick was left with a nearly completed draft, but no screenwriter, so he called in Ring Lardner Jr. and George Oppenheimer to complete the job. Selznick, along with Wellman, Bud Schulberg, Sidney Howard, Dorothy Parker, Moss Hart, George Kaufman, and Robert Carson all contributed additional bits of dialogue, although as you'll see in the credits, Hecht receives sole screenwriting credit. Now, with the leading male role cast, Selznick needed to find the perfect actress to play Hazel Flagg. According to Wellman's son, Bill Wellman Jr., Selznick was initially keen on Janet Gaynor, who also appeared in A Star is Born. The younger Wellman recalls that when his father met Carole Lombard, he was, and I quote, struck by her beauty and effervescent demeanor, end quote, and he convinced Selznick to hire her for Nothing Sacred. However, when you do a little bit of research, memos and correspondence in Selznick's file, held at the University of Texas in Austin, reveals that the producer actually had his eye on Lombard for his next star vehicle as early as December of 1936, well before Nothing Sacred actually went into production. Selznick wrote to his partner, Jock Whitney, who was financing the film, that, and I quote, there's a terrific public demand for Lombard. And he was right. At the time, Lombard was reaching the peak of her Hollywood stardom. She was riding on a wave of successful comedies such as 20th Century, Hands Across the Table, Love Before Breakfast, and My Man Godfrey. Her frenetic acting style had come to embody the wacky screwball comedies that had become popular in the mid-1930s. In short, Lombard was Hollywood's face of screwball comedy. Selznick was a shrewd businessman, so casting Lombard as his leading lady was a no-brainer. Lombard signed with him in late May, and production began in mid-June. Now, contemporaneous accounts from the set suggest that the atmosphere matched the tone of the film with never-ending practical jokes, good-natured roughhousing, and continuous uproar. Perhaps the carnivalesque nature of the set was embellished by Selznick's shrewd publicity head, Russell Birdwell, but Lombard, March, and Wellman were only too keen to play along. This tone continued into the film's publicity campaign prior to its Thanksgiving weekend release, with wacky in-theater gags set up for audience members, including encouraging them to sock the enemy with a boxing speedball and giving them the chance to cast their vote on who makes the dizziest gals, redheads, blondes, or brunettes, and neither of those age particularly well. The poster itself is quite striking as it mimics a boxing match notice. It captures both Hazel and Wally's combative relationship and the adversarial gender dynamics of screwball comedy more broadly. Now, without spoiling anything for you, I will say that Nothing Sacred is a very physical film. And by 1937, Carole Lombard's name was synonymous with the roughhouse style. And that makes sense given that she got her start in slapstick comedy working for Max Sennett. As the unofficial queen of screwball comedy, she personified the boisterous and independent modern heroine. The film came at a turning point in her career. By 1937, Lombard's 7-year Paramount contract was about to expire. Instead of renewing it, she took a big leap of faith and decided to step into the freelancing arena, a relatively untested path in Hollywood at the time. A studio contract meant stability and a steady paycheck. Freelancing was, and still is, quite risky, and in the late 1930s, really only available to movie stars. But the rewards could be immense. Being under a studio contract meant actors had little to no say about the direction of their careers. At the end of the day, even the top movie stars were ultimately studio employees. Freelancing gave them the opportunity and freedom to forge their own career paths and to be able to pick and choose roles that they wanted to play without the threat of suspension or withholding pay. Carole took that risk and remained a freelancer until her death in 1942. Nothing Sacred was part of a 3-picture deal that she signed with Selznick's company, Selznick International Pictures, in 1937, and according to the terms of her contract, she was guaranteed $150,000 per film salary, co-star billing, a mandated 8-hour workday, and the costume designer of her choice, among other perks. Now, 2 other clauses were of major importance: publicity campaign approval rights and the right to approve the use of her image in any and all marketing campaigns. Lombard was a very savvy businesswoman, and I think had she lived a bit longer, she would have probably leaned into that arena a little bit more. And she was hands-on with all aspects of her career. She understood that good publicity was essential if a movie star wanted to stay relevant. Now, I mentioned Russell Birdwell earlier, and he was very much Lombard's kindred spirit. They were on the same page when it came to publicity and exploitation, and together they concocted wacky ideas to keep her name in the press, including a week stint where she worked in the Selznick's International Pictures publicity office, and that included a corresponding photo shoot and an op-ed that Lombard allegedly wrote explaining the importance of good PR, and that was published in The Hollywood Reporter. Selznick was also a showman, so Lombard was very much in her element in his and Birdwell's company. Following Nothing Sacred, they made their second of their 3 contractual films together, which was Made for Each Other. Now, at the same time, Selznick was also working on another little movie, and you may have heard of it, called Gone with the Wind, with Carole's husband, Clark Gable. Selznick and Gable had worked together when Selznick was a producer at MGM, but for reasons unknown to him, Gable immediately disliked him. Selznick had hoped that they could wipe the slate clean on Gone with the Wind, but according to a memo to Lombard from January of 1940, Gable could never shake his suspicions of Selznick, which Selznick didn't quite understand in the first place. Now, in that same memo, Selznick writes, and I quote, "I shall always look back on our past associations as the most pleasant of my career, but I must face the fact that you're married to Clark, and that Clark obviously feels quite differently about me. My principal thought in writing this letter to you is to tell you that freely, and with my blessings and steadfast affection, I will relieve you of your obligation to do a picture for me. And believe me, whichever way you decide, Carole Lombard can have no more earnest a fan, personally or as an actress, than I." Now, Selznick and Lombard never made that third film. I don't want to end this introduction on a sour note, because their collaboration, while brief, was extremely fruitful. Lombard and also William Wellman both considered Nothing Sacred one of the best films that they ever made, and Lombard absolutely adored David O. Selznick. When asked if she'd ever want to direct a film of her own in the future, she replied, "No, but I think I'd like to be David O. Selznick." Now, all things considered, I think that's a perfect testament to their collaborative relationship.
We're all alone, no chaperone can get our number. The world's in slumber, let's misbehave. There's something wild about you, child, that's so contagious. Let's be outrageous, let's misbehave. When Adam won Eve's hand, he wouldn't stand for teasing. He didn't care about those apples